Well, you were as useless as ever this month, weren't you? The words weren't shouted. They were tossed out casually in the kitchen, as if commenting on the weather. But they landed in my chest like a heavy stone. My name is Evelyn Thompson, and I am 77 years old. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word back. I simply, quietly, removed myself from the equation. It felt like gently pulling the last, forgotten nail from a painting that no one found value in anymore, and it was only then, only after the fact, that they finally seemed to notice that the quiet woman who lived upstairs in their house, the woman who had always been there, was a person who had chosen to leave, all on her own, simply to protect what was left of her own dignity. My name is Evelyn Thompson. I was born in 1948, in a little house along the Hudson River in upstate New York. My parents ran a small general store. We were never what you would call wealthy, but they taught me something I carried with me my entire life. A good woman, Evelyn, my mother used to say, is a gentle strength. She supports others so they can shine, without ever needing the spotlight for herself. When I was 24, I married a civil engineer. He would become my husband, and the only man I ever truly loved. We had nearly 35 years together. He was a quiet man, a hard worker, and completely devoted to his family. Our life together wasn't always easy, but just being with him, that was always enough. The simple dinners we shared, the sound of our laughter echoing in the small kitchen, the look in his eyes when he came home, bone-tired from a long day, I remember all of it as if it were yesterday. But then, the day came. It was a June evening, over a decade ago now. A single phone call came from the hospital. My husband, Robert, had been supervising a crew repairing bridge damage after a hurricane. There had been an accident. It happened so fast, I never even had the chance to hear his last words. I was 59 years old. With one phone call, I had become a widow. It felt like my whole world had crumbled into dust. All I had left was our son, Michael, who was in his final year of law school down in New York City. I told myself again and again that I couldn't afford to fall apart. After the funeral, when I returned to the cold, silent house, I wiped away my tears and whispered to the empty rooms, I have to keep going. For him. From that day on, I took any work I could find. In the mornings, I'd prepare and sell lunchboxes to workers downtown. In the afternoons, I'd take in laundry and ironing from neighbors. On weekends, I cleaned houses. Every penny was for Michael, to cover his tuition and living expenses, to make sure he could finish his education without worry. I would read his letters from the city over and over, clutching them in my hands. The one sentence that became my lifeline was, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm working hard." That single line was the only light that kept me from sinking into the darkness. The day he graduated, I finally allowed myself to cry. He brought his diploma home, and that evening, I cooked the first real celebration dinner we'd had in years. As I set the table, I thought of all the nights I'd eaten nothing but soup and toast, and a quiet thought filled my heart. Finally, it was all worth it. When Michael was 30, he got married. With the money I'd painstakingly saved from my Social Security checks and my part-time jobs, I had the old house renovated, adding a full second story. The plan was for Michael and his new wife, Sarah, to live on the first floor. I would live quietly upstairs. They have their own family now, I thought to myself. I'll just live quietly out of the way. As long as I can hear the sound of my grandchildren's laughter, that will be all the happiness I need. I wanted for nothing. I never interfered in their lives. We cooked our meals separately, did our laundry separately, and I bought my own groceries with my small pension. There was only one thing I truly hoped for, one thing I waited for with all my heart, the day my grandchild would call me Grandma. That child would be the embodiment of all my sacrifices, the beautiful result of all my years of hard work. But I soon began to realize something. My son and his wife never once thought of me as part of their family. There was the way their eyes would slide past mine, the way our conversations were always short, cold, and felt like an obligation. Every small interaction seemed to whisper to me, "You don't belong here." Once, I tried to bridge the gap. "Why don't we cook dinner together sometimes?" I suggested to Sarah. "It might save a little money, too." She offered a thin, polite smile. "Oh, we have our own way of doing things," she said smoothly. "But thank you. You don't need to worry about us." I forced a laugh and let it go. Young people are just different these days, I told myself. Don't expect anything. Just be kind. Time will make things better. I repeated those words to myself like a prayer. And just like that, 5 years went by. I kept silent. I endured. I lived my quiet life in my upstairs rooms. And as the ticking of the clock marked the passing of each day, my heart was slowly, steadily being dyed in the color of loneliness. When I first moved into the upstairs apartment, I had a simple belief. If I just live quietly and don't bother my daughter-in-law, everything will work out. I made a point never to set foot in their downstairs space unless I was invited. I did all my own cooking and laundry. At night, I kept the volume on my television so low I had to strain to hear it. I was terrified of being a nuisance. More than anything, I was terrified of becoming the cliché of the nosy, overbearing mother-in-law. In the beginning, Sarah was just a little cold. She would say hello, but it was purely formal. There was no warmth in her voice, and her eyes always seemed to be looking somewhere else, somewhere just past my shoulder. I kept making excuses for her in my mind. She's probably just not used to this arrangement yet, I'd think. It must be strange, starting a new marriage and having your husband's mother living right upstairs. I truly believed that time would change things. So I tried. I made small efforts to close the distance between us. Sometimes I would bake a batch of cookies and leave them by their door. If I made a big pot of chicken soup, I'd bring a bowl down for them. If I heard her coughing, I'd call down the stairs to ask if she was feeling all right. But the response was always the same, a single clipped phrase. "Thanks." That was it. Her voice was always quiet, and her face never broke into a smile. Still, I could bear it. As long as my grandson is healthy and happy, that's all that matters, I told myself. If he calls me Grandma, then none of this coldness will even matter. My grandson, Leo, was the only source of light in that house. Whenever he'd come running up the stairs, his little feet pattering on the wood, calling out, "Grandma, read me a story," my heart would feel warm again. I even kept a secret stash of little hard candies for him in my dresser drawer. Then, about 2 years in, things began to shift. It was early spring. One afternoon, Michael came up to my room. He had an awkward look on his face, and he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Mom?" he started, shuffling his feet. "Listen, Sarah's been really tired lately. And, well, when you watch Leo for too long, she doesn't really get a break, you know?" I just nodded slowly, my hands resting in my lap. "I see," I said, my voice calm. "I understand. If that's what's needed, I'll step back." But that was the moment when a thought surfaced from somewhere deep in my heart. "Oh," I realized with a quiet, sinking feeling. I'm a burden in this house now." From that day on, the sound of my grandson's feet on the stairs became less frequent. If I tried to go down to the living room, Sarah would sometimes close the door just as I approached, or she'd find an excuse to turn me away. "He's studying right now," she would say, her voice polite but firm. The kitchen, the one place I had once dreamed of sharing with her, now felt like a forbidden territory. A room with an invisible wall I was no longer allowed to cross. One afternoon, I remembered how much Leo used to love the chicken noodle soup I made. I decided to make a small pot, just for him, and was in my little kitchenette getting the ingredients ready. Just then, Sarah came in through the back door. She glanced at the carrots and celery on my cutting board and said, without breaking her stride, "You can put that away. He doesn't really eat that anymore." Her words hung in the air. I slowly set the knife down on the counter. I didn't say anything back. I simply turned and went back to my room. And I thought to myself, with a hollowness that seemed to echo in my chest, so now, even my cooking is a nuisance. A few weeks later, my son, Michael, came upstairs. I was at my small sink, washing my lunch plate. He stood in the doorway, holding a plain white envelope, and after a moment of uncomfortable silence, he finally spoke. "Mom, listen, Things are a little tight for us right now. Since we're all living here together, I was wondering, could you help out with about $250 a month for living expenses? For a second, my hands stopped moving in the soapy water. But then I nodded. Of course, I nodded. Yes, that's fine. I can manage that. I have my Social Security, and if I'm careful, I can make it work. That's what I truly believed. And so, a new routine began. On the first of every month, I would place $250 in cash into a white envelope and leave it quietly on a little table by the front door. No one ever said, "Thank you." No one ever asked if I was managing, or if my own budget was getting too tight. My life became a quiet, solitary loop. I cooked my meals alone. I ate them alone. I lived in a room furnished with nothing more than an old, wooden desk and a wall clock that no longer kept the right time. One month, a different thought occurred to me. Maybe I should give it to them in person for a change. That day, I took the envelope downstairs to the kitchen. I found Sarah at the counter and offered her a small smile. "If you ever need anything else, please don't hesitate to ask," I said gently. "I'll help in any way I can." Sarah didn't turn around. She kept her back to me, washing vegetables in the sink. Her voice, when it came, was flat and cold. "Help? What could someone who does nothing but eat and sleep all day possibly do to help?" The words felt like a slap across the face. I stood there for a few seconds, completely frozen. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. Without another word, I turned, walked back up the stairs, and closed the door to my room. That night, I couldn't swallow a single bite of my dinner. I sat at my desk, opened an old, unused notebook, and I picked up a pen. And I wrote down her exact words. I don't know why I did it. I just felt like I had to record it. Not as evidence, not for anyone else to see, but for my own heart, so I would never forget how I was being treated. From that day forward, I started writing everything down. Sarah's words, the looks she gave me, the sharp tone of her voice. I documented each one, carefully, precisely. The more I wrote, the heavier my chest became. But I never felt anger. Instead, a quiet, cold certainty began to settle over me. I was in the very house that I had helped build, the house I had given to my son, and slowly, surely, my existence within its walls was being erased. And then I understood. If I continued to stay silent, if I just kept enduring it, a day would come when I would lose even the reason to believe I belonged here at all. It was the morning of April 5th. Over the Hudson Valley, the gray, drizzly rain that had hung in the air for nearly a week had finally stopped, but my heart felt the complete opposite of the clearing sky. It was heavier, more leaden than it had ever been before. I woke up that day with a dull, radiating ache that spread from my lower back all the way down my left leg. The change in the weather over the past few days had made my joints stiff, my steps were heavy, and my head felt foggy. But, just like every other month, I knew I had to go to the bank to withdraw the cash for the bills. I managed to make my way to the ATM downtown, but when I tried to enter my PIN, a sharp numbness shot through my hand, and my fingers refused to move. Defeated, I turned around and went back home. "I'll try again tomorrow," I told myself. "Maybe I'll feel a little better then." I thought it was such a small thing, but that was the beginning of everything. That month, when I put the money in the envelope, I was short. I forgot one of the bills I'd withdrawn. I only put in $230 instead of the full $250. "I'll just add the rest tomorrow," I thought. "It's only $20. I believed it was a simple, understandable mistake. But I was so naive. Later that evening, I was in my room, folding my laundry. I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were louder than usual, faster, with a sharp, angry rhythm. That's strange, I thought, and I cracked my door open just a little. And in that same instant, without any knock, the door was thrown open with such force that it hit the wall. Sarah stood there, breathing heavily. In her hand was the envelope I had left on the hall table that morning. But it was no longer a neat white rectangle. It was crumbled, crushed in her fist. She didn't say a word. She stalked over to my desk and threw the envelope down. The cash inside fluttered out onto the worn wood. I scrambled to my feet. Before I could even ask, "What's wrong?" she spoke. "Pour your whole life, and now you're just a parasite. Nobody wants you here." The air left my lungs. Every single word was an icy needle piercing straight through my chest. Still, I tried to keep my voice from shaking. I tried to be calm. "I'm so sorry," I managed to say. "I wasn't feeling well today. I'll give you the rest tomorrow. I promise." But Sarah didn't even acknowledge my words. She just stood there, her arms crossed, looking down at me. A cold, mocking smile played on her lips. "Every single month you just sit here, eat, and sleep. Don't you dare think that $250 is you helping us. That's not help. That's rent, yes." In that moment, I felt something deep inside of me, something I had been holding together for years, begin to slowly, irrevocably crumble. Even then, I couldn't bring myself to blame her. I could only ask a question, in a voice so faint I could barely hear it myself. Was there ever a month when I was useful?" Her eyes widened for a second, as if surprised by the question. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like breaking glass. "No, not one. Every month has been a complete waste." "Ah." And then, I couldn't hear anything at all. After she said that, all sound seemed to fade away. The world went silent. And the only thing I was aware of was the feeling of my own heart slowing down, each beat weaker than the last. And that's when I saw him. My grandson, Leo, was standing just outside my open door. He was 5 years old. He was clutching a picture book in his small hands. He must have been coming up to ask me, "Grandma, will you read to me?" And just like he always did. But he didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, his wide eyes darting back and forth between his mother and me. His little face was filled with confusion and fear, his eyes holding 1,000 unspoken questions. But he remained silent. After a moment, he slowly turned around and walked back down the stairs, one careful step at a time. As I watched his small back disappear from view, a single thought settled in my soul. "G.S., I think I just lost him too." I sank down into the chair by my desk, curling into myself, and sat there in the silence. Sarah left without another word, closing the door a little too hard behind her. It was a message without words, a cold final signal that meant, "Figure it out." I didn't move from that spot for a long, long time. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't eat any dinner. Only the photograph of my late husband, resting in the corner of the room, was illuminated by the soft glow of a small nightlight. I found myself staring into his kind eyes, and without warning, a tightness constricted my chest. Was I ever really a strong woman? That's what he used to call me, back when he was alive. But the woman I was now, the woman sitting in this silent room, had no strength left in her at all. There was none to be found. For far too long, I had simply been quiet. I had simply endured. As a mother, as a mother-in-law, and as a grandmother. I truly believed I had fulfilled all of my roles properly. I never interfered. I never complained. I only ever hoped that I would be accepted as a member of the family, and so I lived my life as quietly as a mouse, making not a single wave. And what did I receive in return? The unbearably cold words, "Every month has been a complete waste." That night, I opened that little notebook again, the small, worn journal where I had started keeping a diary of my daughter-in-law's words and actions. I added a new entry, April 5th. Berated for being $20 short on the household money. Her words, "Nobody wants you here." She said it in front of Leo. I stared at the page for a long time, the ink still fresh. Then, I reached into the back of my desk drawer and pulled out a single old manila file. Everything that defined me was inside. My birth certificate, my social security information, my bank statements showing my modest savings. One by one, I carefully, methodically, laid them out on the surface of the desk, And in that moment, for the very first time in my 77 years of life, I had a thought that felt both terrifying and liberating. Maybe I need to legally remove myself from this relationship. It wasn't a thought born of anger or of a desire for revenge. It was simpler than that. It was about protecting what little was left of myself before the last vestiges of my dignity were stripped away completely. For years, the one thing that saved me, the one thing that kept me anchored, was hearing my grandson's voice call out, "Grandma." But now, I felt as if I had been cast out even from that simple name, pushed out not by any law on the books, but by the sharp, cutting edge of words. If that was the case, then what was the point? What was the point of my name being listed under the heading of this family? Any longer? I gently closed the file and placed it back on the desk. I didn't say anything to anyone then. Not a single word. But inside of me, a decision was forming. Quietly, but with an unshakable certainty. It was the first decision I had ever made in my entire life that was purely, solely for myself. I still remember that evening with perfect clarity. A cool night breeze slipped through a gap in the curtains, rustling the fabric. It sounded like someone's faint, weary sigh. I rose slowly from my chair and walked over to the small table where I kept Robert's photograph. I poured a little warm tea into a small porcelain cup and, with a hand that trembled slightly, I placed it in front of his picture. Time had faded the photograph, bleaching the colors to a soft sepia. But his eyes, they were exactly the same. He was still looking at me with that gentle expression he always wore, the one that had always made me feel safe. I lowered my voice to a whisper, as if sharing a secret. "Robert, if you were still here, what do you think you would say? If you could see me now?" There was no reply. There was only the suffocating stillness of the house, and a chilling sensation that my very presence, my own existence, was slowly being erased from within its walls. I opened the old wooden drawer of the desk next to me. Inside were old photographs and letters, relics of a forgotten time. Our wedding picture, the smiling face of my son Michael, when he was just a little boy, and a handwritten letter he had sent me from New York City when he was in law school. As I gently turned over each piece of paper, each frozen moment, I thought to myself, these feel like memories from a past life. Back then, in that other life, I was someone my son could count on. I was his only support. My hand stopped on one particular photograph. It was taken this summer. Michael was in first grade. He was standing in front of the school gates, wrapped in my arms, and we were both beaming at the camera. The paper had yellowed with age, but our smiles were still as bright and clear as the day they were captured. On the back, in my careful cursive, I wrote a new inscription, a memory of a day when his mother mattered to him. No tears came, but deep in my chest a pain remained, heavy and solid, like a stone I was forced to carry. I was once a mother who had given everything to her son without a second thought. I was the woman who, alongside her husband, had built this house from the ground up. Our sweat and our tears were mixed into the mortar of every single brick, and yet now, because of a simple $20 mistake, I was called a parasite. My very existence was treated as nothing more than a troublesome debt. High parts. It wasn't my daughter-in-law's words that hurt me the most. It was my son's silence. He had to know how I was living. He had to know that I never asked for a single thing, that I never made a single demand of them. He knew all of it. And still, he said nothing. He didn't ask, and he didn't defend me. From that moment on, I began to understand. Silence isn't kindness. It isn't forgiveness. It is the act of quietly erasing someone's existence from the world. I stood in front of the small mirror on my closet door. Reflected back at me was a woman with gray streaked hair, with wrinkles carved deep into her skin, and with dull, tired eyes that had been worn down by time. That person in the mirror had grown so accustomed to being lonely that she no longer even knew when she had been pushed to the outside of her own family. I opened the closet. From inside, I took out a sweater, a soft, pale purple. It was the sweater my grandson, Leo, had picked out for my birthday, the only gift I had received in all the years. We had lived together. I gently stroked the soft fabric, then hugged it tightly to my chest. It felt as if I were embracing the last, fragile memory of family that I had left. I understand what this means. Once I sign the papers to legally separate my household, there is no going back. But the thing that is tormenting me now, the thing I can no longer bear, it is not the thought of leaving. It is the fact that I have stayed here for so very long, living as an unwanted presence. That is the truth that is crushing me. Becoming invisible doesn't happen in a day or two. It happens over years. It's built from 1,000 indifferent glances, 100 careless words, and a lifetime of quiet dinners eaten all alone. All of it, piling up day after day, slowly, surely made me transparent. And so, I have made up my mind. I will not wait anymore. I will not hope for anything, not ever again. April 9th, early morning. The sky was a vast, clear blue, and the dogwood tree by the front steps was in full, glorious bloom. Its white petals drifted on the breeze, settling silently on the edge of the stairs. It should have been a peaceful, beautiful morning, but my heart was wrapped in a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a decision to sever, with my own 2 hands, the ties of blood and family that I had spent my entire life holding on to. I woke slowly and brewed myself a cup of jasmine tea. I poured it into an old thermos and placed it in my handbag. Next to it, I placed the manila file of documents I had prepared the night before. My driver's license, a copy of my birth certificate, the deed and mortgage documents for the house, my banking information, the old passbook savings account ledger, and finally, a copy of the will I had drawn up years ago, the one where my son's name was listed as the sole inheritor. I placed everything, every last piece of my official identity, into a quiet, blue plastic file folder. The color seemed to perfectly mirror the state of my soul in that moment, pale, cool, and subdued. It was the color of a winter sky just before the first snow, holding a profound and unwavering calm. I made my way down the stairs, planting each foot with deliberate care, ensuring my steps were completely silent. This was the time of morning when Sarah always took Leo to school. As I expected, the front door had been left unlocked. Without making a sound, I stepped out of that house. The house I had poured my life into building. I turned my back on it all, not like a family member leaving for the day, but like a quiet guest at a hotel, a solitary lodger who had packed her single suitcase and was now checking out. Unnoticed and unacknowledged by anyone. There was no one there to see me off, and I expected no one. My first destination was the county administration building. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the records office, waiting for my number to be called. The waiting area was a small theater of ordinary life. I watched a young couple, their hands clasped tightly together, nervously filling out a marriage license application. A few seats down, an elderly husband and wife were patiently working through the paperwork for some kind of government assistance, their heads bent together over the forms. Everyone in that room was there for a reason, each person clutching documents that represented a turning point, a beginning or an end. And I was there, in my own quiet corner, to formally end my role as a mother. When my number finally flashed on the screen, I rose slowly and walked to the designated window. I carefully placed the blue file on the counter and gently pushed it toward the clerk. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" a young woman asked, her voice soft and professional. I met her eyes and answered in a steady, quiet voice. "I would like to be removed from my son's household registry." For a brief second, her eyes widened in surprise. It was a flicker of shock, quickly masked by professional composure. She recovered instantly, explaining the process as she handed me the necessary application form. When I reached the section on the form labeled "Reason for Separation," she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice in a gesture of privacy. "If you don't mind me asking, could you please tell me the reason for this request?" I looked down at the form, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "Because I am no longer a member of that family," I said, the words feeling both heavy and light as they left my mouth. The young woman said nothing in response to that. She simply gave me a small, understanding nod, then turned to her computer. The soft clicking of her keyboard was the only sound between us as she processed my request and printed out the official documents. But when she looked back at me, her eyes held something I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. It was a glimmer of sympathy, a look of genuine human compassion. It was a kind of gaze I had long since forgotten existed. When I walked out of the county administration building, a single sheet of paper was clutched in my hand. It was a confirmation receipt, a simple document indicating that my name had been officially removed from the household. It was just a few lines of typed text and an official stamp, nothing more. But to me, it was a quiet letter of farewell. A final goodbye to the roles of mother, mother-in-law, and family member. It was my declaration of independence. From there, I walked directly to the bank. Ever since my husband Robert passed away, my son and I had shared a joint bank account. All of my savings, my monthly Social Security deposits, and any withdrawals or transactions, I had entrusted everything to Michael. He's my own son, I trust him completely, I used to tell myself. There's no reason to be suspicious or guarded with your own child. That was what I had truly, foolishly believed. But after the events of April 5th, I had been forced to learn a painful lesson. Blood ties do not give someone a license to ignore you, to dismiss your worth until you are nothing. I sat down across from a bank manager and stated my purpose clearly. I want to remove my son's authority from all of my financial accounts. From this day forward, I will be managing my own affairs. When he politely inquired as to the reason for the change, I simply repeated my statement, my voice calm but unyielding. I will be managing my own affairs now. It took nearly an hour of paperwork, but in the end, every account, every savings bond, every power of attorney was transferred back into my sole name. When it came time to sign the final documents, I picked up the pen and wrote my full name, Evelyn Thompson, on each signature line. I wrote it slowly, deliberately, without a trace of hesitation, each letter a firm, solid stroke of ink. On the way back, I stopped at a small stationery shop and purchased a box of simple cream-colored notepaper, a pack of matching envelopes, and some copy paper. Back in the solitude of my new room, I carefully arranged the documents I had gathered that day, the official confirmation of my removal from the household registry and the new statements from the bank, showing all accounts were now solely in my name. I made clean copies of everything, folded them neatly, and placed them in one of the envelopes, along with a single sheet of the notepaper. The letter I wrote was very short. It read, "As of today, your mother is, by law, no longer affiliated with you. This is what you wanted. You no longer have to call me part of your family. I wish you well." On April 12th, I mailed that envelope to the house where I had lived for nearly 30 years. For the return address, I wrote no name, no street, no city. I wrote only a single word, Evelyn. I live now in a small, quiet retirement community on the west side of town. There is a lovely garden where flowers are always in bloom, and a cozy reading room with comfortable chairs. Most importantly, no one here looks at me with condescending eyes. I didn't choose this place for its location or for its amenities. I chose it for one reason, and one reason only. It was a place where I felt I would not be a burden to anyone. 3 days after I sent the letter, my phone began to ring. It rang again and again. It was Michael. I didn't answer. I wasn't running away. I simply felt there was nothing left to explain. If he had truly been concerned about me, if he had cared at all, he would have noticed something was wrong long before I took the step of legally severing our ties. That evening, one of the staff members knocked gently on my door. "Mrs. Thompson," she said kindly, "there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's your son." I was in the communal garden, my hands covered in soil from tending to the flower beds. Peeking from behind the delicate lace curtain of the common room window, I saw a familiar figure. I saw Michael's back as he rushed into the central courtyard, the envelope and my letter clutched tightly in his hand. But it was too late. He was far too late. I did not leave my home that day. I simply resigned from my position. I quietly stepped down from the role of mother, a role I had played in a place where, for years, I had been waiting for a day of understanding that was never going to come. I did not go out to meet my son. Instead, I went back to my room and sat in my armchair, watching the late afternoon light spill across the windowsill, tracing a golden line on the floor. I watched it for a long, long time, as if that line of light was a border separating two different worlds. In my lap rested my old cell phone, the ringer silenced. The screen was filled with a long list of missed calls. Every single one was from the same number, the number of the son I had spent my entire life raising. But the ache that tightened in my chest with every phantom vibration was not the sting of regret. It was something purer, something deeper. It was sorrow. I imagine Michael must be in a state of utter confusion right now. The idea that I, his mother, the woman who had always silently accepted everything, who had absorbed every slight and swallowed every hurtful word, would take such a decisive action was likely something he had never, ever considered. But his shock, I knew, did not stem from love. It stemmed from years of taking me for granted. It was the shock of a person who had long ago stopped seeing me as a person. He must have believed I would simply continue to obey, to exist quietly in the background. That I would say nothing, ask for nothing, and just fade away in the corner of an upstairs room. But now, holding that official notice and my short final letter, perhaps he was finally beginning to understand. Silence is not the same as consent. I stepped out onto my small balcony. The white chrysanthemums I had planted just the day before were swaying gently. In the spring breeze, the April air was soft and carried the scent of fresh earth, of warm sunshine, and of something else, something that smelled like a distant memory of freedom. In that moment, her words came back to me as clear as if she were standing right there. Sarah's voice, flat and cold, "Nobody wants you here." And my own voice, trembling and small, asking the question that had shattered my world. Was there ever a month when I was useful? I am not asking for an apology anymore. I don't need sympathy. I have finally found a place where my existence is not a problem to be solved, but simply a fact to be accepted, and that is more than enough. All I ever wanted was the right to step away quietly, to be seen as a human being, not just a role I was meant to play. To have the love and the sacrifices of my entire life acknowledged, not erased, as I made my exit. That was all. From far away, from the direction of the park, I could hear the sound of children laughing, and in that sound, a memory surfaced. A memory of him. My grandson. He was 5 years old. I remembered how he used to come racing up the stairs to my room almost every day, how he'd wrap his little arms around my legs and look up at me with that bright, infectious smile. "Grandma, read me a story," he'd laugh, his voice full of pure, uncomplicated joy. I wonder, does he even remember me now? Does he ever ask, "Grandma, where are you?" Or has someone already told him, in a soft, careful voice, "Grandma is very busy, honey. She isn't coming back anymore." I don't know. I will never know. But I hope, oh, how I hope that somewhere deep inside that small, innocent heart of his, some small piece of my existence remains. Not as a problem, not as a weight, but as a warm memory. Not a burden, just a warmth. I walked back into my room and gently slid the balcony door shut. It felt as though I were closing a door to the past, quietly, carefully, so as not to disturb what lay on the other side. And as I did, I knew with a deep and unshakable certainty in my heart, from this moment forward, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. 3 days after I moved into the retirement home, one of the staff members approached me with a kind smile. "Evelyn," she said softly, "your son is here to see you again." This time, she explained, he didn't seem frantic or panicked. He looked calm, resolved. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and a small bag of fruit, the kind of simple, thoughtful gifts I should have received from him years and years ago. It wasn't just a late offering, it felt impossibly, achingly overdue. I agreed to see him. It wasn't because my heart was wavering. It wasn't because I was having second thoughts. It was because I needed to look him in the eye just one last time and put a final, definitive end to all the words that had been left unspoken for so long. The visiting room was a small, pleasant space with polished hardwood floors. A low, round table sat in the center, and through the large window, you could see the flowers blooming in the central courtyard. I took a seat first and waited in the quiet stillness. A few moments later, the door opened and he walked in. My only son. He was wearing a wrinkled suit, and his eyes were red and swollen. He was still clutching the envelope I had mailed him a few days before. "Mom," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I gave a small, simple nod. There was no smile on my face, but there was no coldness either. It was just the quiet, peaceful acknowledgement of someone who no longer expected anything from the world. He sat down in the chair across from me and placed the bag of fruit on the table. For a long while, neither of us spoke, but I was content to wait in the silence. I had endured more than a decade of his silence already. A few more minutes meant nothing to me. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never imagined it had gotten this bad." I looked directly into his eyes, my own gaze calm and steady. I asked him a simple question. "Did you not know? Or was it that you simply didn't want to know?" He fell silent again, unable to answer. I continued, my tone as even and conversational as if I were discussing the weather. "That day, when she called me useless, what did you say to her?" My son lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the floor. I didn't stop her," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I had no idea you felt that way." I kept my expression unchanged, my voice a placid, unwavering stream. "It isn't that you didn't know I felt that way. It's that you never considered that your mother could still be hurt by words like that. Isn't that closer to the truth?" My question hung in the air between us. He looked up, speechless. I could see the regret plain in his eyes, a deep and profound sorrow. But it was the kind of regret that comes too late, the kind that can never fix. "What has been broken?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shed a tear. I simply reached into my handbag, took out a fresh envelope, and slid it across the table toward him. "This," I said, "is a copy of my new will." He reached for it hesitantly, his fingers trembling as he opened the flap and read the single page inside. The document was clear and unambiguous. All assets and property are to be donated in full to the local chapter of the American Red Cross. No inheritance shall be left to any family members. I spoke again, my voice as dispassionate as a news anchor reading the evening report. "I have no intention of leaving anything to people who treated me like a piece of furniture. An inheritance is not a reward for indifference." He leaned forward, reaching out as if to touch my hand. But I gently drew my hand back, resting it in my lap and folding it over the other. It wasn't a gesture of rejection. It was an act of preserving my own dignity. "Mom, please, just think about it one more time. So we know we were wrong. I know I was wrong. But I'm your son." I shifted my gaze to the window, to the brightly colored flowers in the courtyard. I didn't look at him as I spoke my final words on the matter. "Yes, you are my child. But you are no longer the child I once believed in." Silence descended upon the room once more, heavier this time. I stood up from my chair and walked over to a small bookshelf against the wall, where a potted orchid was blooming. Without turning back to face him, I spoke again. "Do you understand how things break? A crack in a vase doesn't come from a single, violent earthquake. It forms over time. From being stepped on, day after day after day, and even though it never makes a sound, one day, it simply and naturally shatters." I finally turned to look at him, my eyes no longer filled with sadness, but with the quiet resolve of someone who has accepted her reality. I used to think that a family could overcome anything, but I was wrong. A relationship where one person does all the giving isn't a family. It doesn't matter if you're connected by blood. That's not a bond. That is exploitation. I gave him a single, formal nod. "You should go now. I don't need the fruit, and I don't need your apology. But I do have one last request. From this day forward, please do not think of me as a shadow in the corner of your house." He remained seated, his face buried in his hands, unable to form a reply. I was the first to leave the room. Not look back. Once I was out in the hallway, I paused for a moment, letting the silence of the building settle around me. My heart was still beating a little faster than usual, but there was no pain anymore. I know now that I will never again be able to see him as the son I once loved so dearly. But that's all right, because now, finally, I am no longer living out of a sense of duty as a mother. I am beginning to live, for the very first time, as a human being. After leaving the visiting room, I walked slowly down the long corridor toward the common area. From a room nearby, I could hear the soft murmur of a radio talk show. From the small kitchenette, the gentle scent of brewing herbal tea drifted into the hall. Out in the courtyard, a few of the other residents were playing a game of checkers, their cheerful laughter echoing in the afternoon sun. I never once looked back, not even for a second. I knew he was likely still sitting in that silent room, all alone. My heart felt neither light nor heavy. There was no pain. There was only the quiet, empty space that remains after a door has been firmly closed for the last time. Not everyone can understand it. That feeling of closing a door, with your own two hands, that you once believed was your entire life. That evening, I sat at the small round table in my room. I opened a drawer and took out a brand new, empty notebook. On the very first page, I wrote, April 15th. The day we first truly faced each other. My son cried. But he couldn't find the words that really needed to be said. I didn't blame him. I simply chose silence to protect what was left of myself. I set my pen down and let out a small, quiet sigh. There was a time, not so long ago, when I would have forgiven him instantly. I would have offered a gentle smile and told him everything was all right. But I understand something now that I didn't understand then. If you forgive too easily, too many times, it becomes the same as erasing yourself. It's a slow, quiet, disappearing act. And if I don't protect myself, who will? If I don't value my own life, no one else will ever see me as a person worth protecting. I reached for the small transistor radio on my nightstand. Its familiar weight, a small comfort in my hand. I turned the dial until I found the classical station, the one my husband and I used to listen to on quiet Sunday afternoons. A quiet, warm, and slightly melancholic melody filled the small room. A gentle piano sonata that seemed to softly stroke the part of my heart that had spent so long playing the role of the silent mother. It was a soothing balm on a wound I was only now beginning to understand the depth of. The music brought a memory to the surface, a stray comment my husband Robert had made when we were much younger. We were sitting on the porch swing, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight. You know, Evelyn, he'd said, his voice thoughtful, if the day ever comes when you have to go on alone, I want you to live your life with the feeling that someone is watching you with respect. Live like you're someone worth admiring. I remember laughing at the time, swatting his arm playfully. Oh, Robert, you think too much, I'd told him, but now I understand what he meant. He was giving me a gift, a shield for the future. He was giving me a way to hold on to my dignity, that essential part of a person that can get so easily lost as the years wear you down. I pushed myself up from my chair and walked over to my dresser. From the bottom drawer, tucked away beneath a stack of old linens, I pulled out a faded photograph. It was a picture of my grandson, Leo, when he was just a year old. He was nestled in my arms, his face split into a wide, gummy smile, and I was smiling right back at him. My own smile was just as genuine, just as unguarded. There was no awkwardness in it, no distance. It was a simple, straightforward, and gentle smile. I looked at that photograph and realized, with a quiet pang in my chest, that it was probably the most precious memory I have from my time as a grandmother. I took the photograph and placed it on the windowsill, right next to a potted orchid with delicate, pale purple buds that looked like they were ready to burst open at any moment. Then I spoke softly, as if whispering a promise to myself. Starting tomorrow, I said to the empty room, I'm not going to live my life trying to prove my worth to someone else. I'm going to try living again, just for me. Life here at the small retirement community in Beacon, New York, flows slowly and quietly. The days are predictable, the rhythms gentle. But for me, this place isn't an ending. It feels, in every way that matters, like a beginning. My new routine has become a source of comfort. I wake at 5 o'clock every morning, just as the sky is beginning to lighten. I brew myself a cup of jasmine tea and take it out to the little porch, where I water the flowers in their pots. Then, I sit down at my desk and practice my calligraphy. For so many years, the hand that now holds the brush trembled with unspoken words, with a quiet and persistent loneliness. Now, that same hand moves the brush with a steady calm. It can create a soft, flowing horizontal line just as easily as it can, a strong, confident vertical one. It feels as if a thick fog that has been clouding my heart for years is finally, slowly, beginning to lift. Here, everyone calls me Sunny Evelyn. It started one afternoon, a few weeks after I arrived. I was in the common room, teaching one of the other residents, an old gentleman named Mr. Anderson who was well into his 80s. The trick to writing the word love in a single, flowing cursive script. He kept messing it up, his hand shaking. After several failed attempts, he sighed and muttered to himself, "I just can't get it right. My heart must be all jumbled up today." I couldn't help but smile. I gently placed my hand over his to steady it. "If your heart is jumbled, let's start by steadying your hand," I said softly. "Once your hand is steady, I'm sure your heart will feel steady too." And from that day on, the name stuck. Not because I'm always smiling, but because, as they say, I'm someone who knows how to say things that make people feel a little bit lighter. I've become friendly with a few of the other residents who live on my floor. Each of them carries their own quiet sorrows. There's a woman whose daughter took over her house and then pushed her out. Another who was tricked into co-signing a loan for her grandson's gambling debts. We all have scars hidden deep in our hearts. One day, one of them finally asked me the question. "Evelyn," she said, her voice gentle, "what brought you here?" I offered a small smile and answered quietly, "I just got tired of being considered useless as in my own home." No one said a word after that. But ever since that day, I've noticed a change. When my back is aching, someone will quietly bring a chair over for me. On days when my feet are tired, a warm cup of tea will appear on the table beside me, placed there without a word. They are small things, I know, but they are enough. They make me feel seen. I am no longer an invisible presence. No longer just a sound from the upstairs room that no one bothers to acknowledge. Then, one Wednesday morning, a call came into the main office of the retirement community. The call was from a public school in the Bronx. "We're trying to reach Leo's grandma," the voice on the other end said. "Does a woman by that name live there?" I felt my breath catch in my throat. Leo, the name of my only grandson. The person on the phone was his teacher. "Lately, Leo has been talking a lot about his grandmother in class," she explained. "The other day, he told the whole class that his mom said mean things to her. It turns out another child happened to be recording the class story time on their tablet, and the audio clip got shared among some of the parents." For a moment, I was completely speechless. Everything I thought had been forgotten, everything I assumed had been swept under the rug, was still alive inside that little boy. His clear eyes and his gentle heart had been holding on to me, somewhere deep inside, all this time. A little while later, a post on a local online parenting forum started getting a lot of attention. One of the parents had shared a transcript of the audio. "My mommy said grandma is useless, but grandma taught me my letters and made me soup when I was sick and read me books. Grandma is not useless at all." Those simple, childish words began to quietly stir people's hearts. There were voices of criticism, voices of sympathy, and then a flood of voices from other elderly people who had been hurt by their own families, sharing their own stories of pain and neglect. It didn't take long for my daughter-in-law, Sarah, to be identified as the mother in the story. She worked for a company that created educational content for children. It was a workplace that, at least on the surface, prided itself on promoting family values and the dignity of the elderly. At first, her company tried to defend her. But as the recording spread and the public outcry grew louder, they could no longer ignore it. She lost her job. And me? I don't feel happy about it. I don't feel like I've won anything. I have never been a person who wished for the downfall of others. It's just that sometimes the truth doesn't need anyone to avenge it. Sometimes it finds a way to speak all on its own. After that, I started receiving a money order in the mail every month from my son. It was for $250, the exact amount I had been forced to pay them for so many years. I keep all of them in a drawer, still sealed in their envelopes. I have never opened a single one. I don't send them back. And I don't send a thank you note. I just let them be. It's my quiet way of stating a simple fact. You can't buy back dignity with money. What I wanted was never a monthly allowance. It was acknowledgement. It was to have my existence as a mother, the mother who had weathered so many winters in that house, recognized and respected. But the moment that truly warmed my heart came on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the courtyard garden, pulling weeds from one of the flower beds, when one of the staff brought me a small package. The return address simply said, LEO. Inside was a single drawing, done with the clumsy, earnest lines of a child. It was a picture of a woman with white hair, standing next to a pot of flowers, and she was smiling. Underneath the drawing, in big, wobbly letters, he had written, Grand May is smiling. Grand M.A. is the nicest. I held the drawing in my hands, unable to find any words at all, and quietly, I began to cry. I thought I had lost everything. Absolutely everything. But if that small, innocent heart still remembered me, if he still saw me as someone who was needed in this world, I realized that was enough. That single, simple fact was enough for me to live out the rest of my days, without a single regret. The night the drawing from my grandson arrived, I didn't sleep at all. I couldn't. I placed the drawing on the small nightstand next to my bed. It didn't have a proper wooden frame. Instead, one of the kind staff members at the community had fashioned one for me out of some sturdy cardboard and a piece of silk fabric she had. It was by no means a fancy thing, but to me, that drawing, it felt like a new birth certificate. It felt like a document that declared a new beginning. I no longer had to be a mother. I no longer had to be a wife, and I certainly no longer had to be the grandmother who was looked down upon. I could simply be Evelyn. Just one person named Evelyn, a person who could live with her dignity, who could hold on to her memories, and, most importantly, a person who no longer felt the need to beg anyone to, please, just understand me. I could finally live as that person. Ever since the story of what happened began to spread online, things started arriving at the retirement community where I live. Letters, words of thanks and encouragement, sometimes even small, thoughtful gifts. They came from people I had never met. A middle-aged woman who wrote about how her own in-laws had treated her with such coldness. A young man who confessed that he was filled with regret for how callously he had treated his own parents. They were all strangers. One letter from a young woman in college was written in a beautiful, looping script. Dear Evelyn, I read your story and I just sat here and cried. From now on, I'm going to call my mother every single week. Not because it's a duty, but because it suddenly hit me that one day, my mother might also just quietly disappear. And I couldn't bear that thought. I read every single one of those letters, one by one. Then I would fold each one carefully and place it inside a small wooden box I keep on my desk. Am I really the kind of person who deserves this much gratitude? To be honest, I don't know. I'm not sure I am. But there is one thing I have come to understand. A story that speaks of pain can sometimes become a mirror for someone else. My life continues in much the same way. I teach my calligraphy class. I tend to the flower beds in the courtyard. And sometimes, at the gatherings for the other residents, I have even started to speak a little bit about my own experiences. One day, a woman who had just moved into the community a few weeks earlier came and sat down next to me. She leaned in and said, her voice barely a whisper, I heard your story. I put up with my daughter-in-law for 12 years. 12 long years. But because of you, I finally realized that it's okay to live for myself now. I didn't say anything in return. I just gently took her hand and gave it a small, firm squeeze. There is a kind of pain that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. But just knowing that someone else sees you and that they will never again call you useless, that is more than enough. It is all I need. There is something that I have only now, at this late stage of my life, finally come to understand. My hair has turned almost completely white. The skin on my hands is loose and thin. My legs have grown weak, and I can't walk very far anymore. And only now, at this age, have I finally realized it? It was something so incredibly simple. No one is born into this world to be looked down upon. Not even when you get old, not even when you feel like you have nothing left to give to anyone anymore. For so long, I believed it. I believed that being a mother was a symbol of sacrifice, that it meant you had to take a step back, nod silently, and endure whatever came your way, no matter what, that you had to crush your own spirit, push down your own needs, all for the sake of keeping peace in the home. But then, one day, a different thought came to me. What if that sacrifice goes completely unnoticed, completely unappreciated by anyone? Then it's no longer a sacrifice, is it? It's simply the act of erasing yourself. I was once a mother, and a wife, and a grandmother, and also the person who lives upstairs. All I wanted was to hear the words, "Thank you," just once. All I wanted was to feel a kind gaze rest on me, just for a moment. I waited for so long, hoping my son would finally stand up for me, that he would shield me from his wife's cruel words, Hubble's parrots. But those small, simple things are the ones that never came. And so, with my own two hands, I chose to erase my own name from a place where I had already ceased to exist. The life I live now is very simple, very modest, but my heart is at peace. A cup of warm tea, the soft sunlight of a spring afternoon, and my friends, who I spend time with, tending to the flowers, humming old folk songs, practicing our calligraphy, or just talking about recipes. Here, no one ever asks me, "How much money do you have in the bank?" No one ever questions me, "Did you get along with your daughter-in-law?" Here, I don't have to prove my own value to anyone. I can just be me. Perhaps you, the person who is hearing this story, perhaps you have a father or a mother, perhaps you have a grandfather or a grandmother. Maybe you even live with them. Maybe they just sit quietly in a corner of the house, listening to the radio, or making a thin vegetable soup. Or maybe they sometimes forget to turn off the lights in a room. And seeing them like that, have you ever, just for a second, thought to yourself, "They're not good for anything anymore"? Maybe you never said the words out loud, but maybe your eyes said it for you. Maybe your silence said it. Maybe you were the one who placed the label of worthless upon them. If that is you, then as one mother who was quietly erased from her family, there is something I desperately need to tell you. Older people don't ask for much. We don't need money, or luxury, or grand flowery words. We just need to feel that I am still a part of this family. Just to feel that is enough. For instance, just a few simple words at night. "Hey Mom, did you get a chance to eat dinner?" "Dad, you look tired. Are you doing okay?" Or maybe, as you're handing them a bowl of soup, "This might be a little too salty, but Grandma, could you try it for me?" Just that. With just those few words, a heart can be saved. I no longer plan to write a will to leave behind an inheritance. Instead, this is what I believe now. The thing I will leave behind at the end of my life will not be property. I want it to be a story. A story like a mirror that someone in my family might see themselves in and learn from. I want to leave behind courage. I want to tell my grandson, "Your grandmother disappeared quietly. It wasn't because she was angry, it was because she felt she wasn't considered family anymore." And then, that little boy, still so young, he raised his voice for me. And that fact, that one single fact, taught me something. The bond is still there. But a bond isn't something held together by obligation. It's something protected by gratitude. To you, who has listened to my story all this way, please try to remember. When was the last time you hugged your mother? When was the last time you served your father a plate of food? When was the last time you held your grandmother's or your grandfather's hand, looked them right in the eye, and truly talked with them? If you were a child who was a little bit cold, please make a phone call today. I'm sorry. How are you doing? Just that. And maybe, just maybe, the sadness that has been locked away, unspoken, for so many years might begin to loosen its grip. Just a little. I have no intention of living as the background scenery in someone else's life anymore. And I have no intention of blaming the people who hurt me. I only have a wish. I hope this story finds its way into someone's heart, somewhere out there. And I hope that person will take just one single minute to stop and think about their own family, about how they treat the people they are supposed to love. Because the truth is, there is no such thing as a useless parent. There is only a heart that has forgotten how to be grateful. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening all the way to the end. If there are words in your heart that you've wanted to say to your father, your mother, your grandfather, or your grandmother, please feel free to share them in the comments. It could be a thank you that you never got the chance to say, or a sorry that came too late. It doesn't matter. And if you, yourself, are a parent who has silently endured for years, please never forget this. We all have the right to live with dignity. That isn't a gift someone gives to you. It is a choice you have the right to make for yourself. At any age, as long as we never forget gratitude, we still have the power to love. Evelyn Thompson, age 77. From the story of a mother who will never again be called useless.